Hi all, welcome to Parker's Reefs. Today's episode I'm going to give you a tour, warts and all, of my 6-year-old 6 by 2.5 by 2 foot mixed Australian reef. Hey all, welcome to Parker's Reefs. As discussed, today we're going to be going over the ins and outs of my tank. It's coming up to 6 years old now, and talking about what I've learnt with it, the mistakes I've made, the things I'd do differently, and also the future of this tank. So if you're new, be sure to subscribe and hit that bell notification so you don't miss any future videos. And if you're a regular viewer, thank you. I really appreciate you taking the time to watch my videos. So today's episode comes about from a number of questions I've had from a lot of reefers out there, a lot of people watching my channel, and they've pointed out that I like to cover other people's tanks in a lot of detail, and I don't talk about my own all that much. So I thought we'd do a full feature episode today on my tank here, the history of it, what I've learnt with it, the equipment I run, the fish, the corals, how I go about placing them. You name it, I'm going to try and cover it in this video. So it could be a bit of a long one. I hope that's all right. Feel free to skip through parts that are of no interest to you. But if you have any further questions or any things that I haven't covered in this video, be sure to pop it in the comment section down below, and I'll do my best to either follow it up with another video or just answer you straight there. So I guess where do we start? This is the tank that I wanted to build straight away. Actually closer to 7 years ago, I wanted to build this tank and get straight into the world of reefing. The way I actually got into fish was a slightly different path. A lot of people get into reef keeping by having freshwater tanks as they're younger, and as they grow up they evolve and they want to go to the next challenge, and they find themselves in saltwater aquariums, and then add to the mix. Once they get a handle on fish, they start adding in corals to the mix. I had a slightly different path. My brother-in-law ended up becoming the manager of a brand new pet store just around the corner here, and my wife and I wanted to support him, so we went down and we bought a 9-litre freshwater all-in-one tank just for like a beta, maybe, I don't know, another fish, community fish in there. I don't know anything about freshwater fish. I only had that tank for a little while. And we ended up placing that tank on our kitchen bench. And we just really began to enjoy having breakfast on the kitchen bench, well, at the kitchen bench, talking to those fish. They sort of became part of the family, and at that point in time I realized, like I do with almost every other hobby, whether it be drag racing, competitive pinball playing, you name it, a few other things that I've gotten into, I tend to go all into my hobbies. So I looked at this little 9-litre tank and I went, we got to do something better than that. Let's get a big tank. And at that point in time I thought a big tank was like 400 or 500 litres. I didn't think there was anything really that much bigger than that in a home sense. Like, I know you go to like SeaWorld or hotels or whatever and they have these, 20,000 litre tanks, but it's a whole separate story. So I started having a look around. We went back to that pet store. They had some cool setups, but we went to what I'd call a real aquarium, and stumbled across the side of saltwater fish keeping and was blown away. The variety of fish, the colors, the personalities of them, it just really looked to be next level. So I decided there and then, saltwater's where it's at, that's what we got to do. And I basically started planning a system like this right there and then. But thankfully, I decided just to do a little bit of a sanity check, and I thought maybe I should just dip my toe in the water first, because the more research I did, the more I saw that it was very difficult, and a lot of people try and then end up backing out of the hobby. So I bought a little Red Sea Max 130, just secondhand, just so I could give it a try. I deliberately picked that system because it was an all-in-one. It was a known platform. If I had any trouble or any questions, I could ask online. Everyone's got the same combination of equipment. They can guide me through it, and it would be a bit of a fast track to learning the system. So I got my Red Sea Max 130, set that up, and within basically once it was cycled, it was only like 2-3 months. So I had a cycle month, and then I had a month or two of fish and coral, and then I was like, yeah, I'm in love with this hobby. Let's go all out. So thankfully I started getting around. I started doing some local fish shop crawls, checking out, chatting to some of the staff, seeing the stock they had in hand. And I came across Dave at Deer Park, who we just gelled. He was a straight shooter, told me what I needed to know in the hobby, wouldn't sell me something that wouldn't be right for me. And I knew that was going to be my local fish shop. It's just a touch under an hour away each direction from my house, but was well worth the drive because I always really enjoyed the trip to Deer Park. Dave and I started planning this system here. Complete custom system, 6 foot by 6 foot long, 2.5 foot deep by 2 foot tall, full custom cabinet, full custom sump. We started planning the lighting system, the sump, the filtration, planning the whole thing from the ground up and piecing together some of the equipment. Some of the equipment I still bought secondhand. In fact, a good portion of the equipment I still bought secondhand because for those of you who have ever set up a 6-foot reef aquarium before, it ain't cheap. So you don't necessarily just want to buy everything brand new. So I took Dave's advice on what things I should buy brand new, what brands were good, what things I could look into buying secondhand, and we got that all pieced together. Thankfully, what was it? That took a few months to get planned and prepared, and I put some images up on screen of the tank getting assembled and getting ready for delivery. By that stage, thankfully, I'd made quite a few friends in the reef keeping hobby, and I was able to put a call out to see if anyone would be able to give me a hand in setting this tank up, because it was just going to be near impossible to do by myself. I'd used to be dealing with 130-litre tanks, not 900-litre tanks. So I had a whole bunch of people come over and give a hand for when this system was delivered. Dave and Mark from Deer Park were also here. Billy, the tank builder himself from Starfire Aquatics, came and delivered the tank. We got it all set up and running in a day. I had some fantastic help with the scape, and I'll put some pictures up of the scape of how it evolved over time. And the tank kind of just came together. In full disclosure, at that point in time, I still really did not know what I was doing. I was taking advice, taking a bit of a leap of faith from those who I respected and trusted in the hobby, and they didn't steer me wrong at all. The scape, whilst I had a little bit of influence into it, it was really put together by some friends that were here in the day. And to be honest, I couldn't be happier with it. When it was first put in the tank, I wasn't so sure about it. It looked, I don't know, a little funny, a little bit like a pile of rocks, which I guess scapes without a lot of coral do. But over time, as the corals grew in, and then I sort of worked what areas got good flow and placement, it started to evolve and really started to become a reef. So I guess one piece of advice I'd give there is don't stress your scape too much. You want to have room to put coral. Don't worry about having an aesthetically looking scape at that point in time, because rock's always going to look like rock. If you try to make rock look like something other than a rock, it probably looks good at the start when there's no coral on it, but then it's just going to be weird for coral to grow on it. The other thing is, try not to overthink it too much. This is a living piece of art. You can continually change it and shape it. Moving one coral from one placement to another placement completely changes the look of your tank. So try not to overthink the scape too much. From there, I went the natural cycle. So we had brand new sand. It was Cairns Marine live rock, so it was all wet live rock. No artificial rock in this tank. At the point of installation, we had 2 large Tunsies, and I'm sorry, I cannot remember the Tunsi model. They're put into the Tunsi rocks, which were a little obvious at the start. You could kind of see the fake rocks with the Tunsi pumps in them, but as the tank grew in, you can't see it at all. Unfortunately, as the tank has grown in more, it becomes nearly impossible to take those Tunsi pumps out for servicing. So I'm sure they're pretty well caked up and not putting out anywhere near the flow they originally put out. Thankfully, I had them on pretty low voltage, so I could up the voltage and also up the power to them, and they're still producing respectable flow. But as the tank's grown in, I've had to add more Tunsies. I've added 2 Vortec MP40s, and now I've got 2 Gaia 350s on there as well, just because there's a lot more coral, and the tank's grown in a lot more. It would just still need more flow. Apart from the pumps, originally when I set the tank up, I had 3 GHL Mitris LED lights on there. I pretty quickly grew that out to 5. I had 3 at the start there because I picked up 3 secondhand. I ended up going to 5 because I found another 2 secondhand. And to be honest, they were fantastic lights. They did the job really well. I ran those all the way through until it was about a year ago now. So I bought them secondhand and they ran for 5 years. So they were probably getting up around 7, 8, 9 years old. And I know people say LEDs last forever, but they don't. The bulbs or the little clusters do start to just tire a bit. And particularly in a marine aquarium environment, you're putting a lot of heat into them, a lot of salt water, humidity. They still worked fine, but I was just looking for the next step with the tank, and that was when I moved to the Kessel A360X. I did see a pretty instant response from my corals when adding those lights. I did also see an instant response to a little bit of nuisance algae. Obviously, adding a bit of extra light just fueled those algae to come along. So I had a little bit of cyano come after adding the Kessels. It's now pretty well under control. There's a couple of patches in there. Nothing to be too concerned about. One other thing, lighting-wise, that I got onto fairly early with this tank was metal halides, and I have not looked back, and every one of my other coral growing tanks has metal halides on them, and I can't say enough of them. I was fortunate enough to pick up, I think it was 5 or 6 individual metal halide fixtures from secondhand from someone who was shutting down, or they had them in the shed and they were going to throw them out because LED was the new craze. I got like the 5 or 6 of them with ballasts, and a box full of bulbs for like $50. Obviously some of the bulbs were used, or some of the bulbs weren't really the spectrum I wanted, but the fixtures and the ballasts were all I really needed. I soon replaced them with radium 20,000 Kelvin bulbs, which just give off the color that I absolutely love, the spectrum I love, and I guess more importantly the power and spectrum that my corals love. So I've been running halides on this tank now for I think 4 to 4.5 years, and it's one of the things I put down to the success of this tank. There's 3 things that I really think are the key points to this tank running as well as it has for the number of years it has. First one being metal halides. I've talked enough about those. I highly recommend them. The downsides with the heat, when you're as down far south as I am, we don't really get that hot down here. Plus, if it is, we have fans and air cons. I don't even run a chiller on this tank. So the heat's not really an issue for me. In fact, if anything, it helps heat the tank. I've got some temperature graphs where you can see the water temperature go up and down, up and down, up and down as the heater turns on and off. And then as soon as the halides turn on, that graph just smooths out, because the halides are actually pumping that much heat into the tank that the heater doesn't switch on and off anymore. So you could say it's saving power there. Bit of a stretch, I know, but let's roll with it. The other thing that I put down as a huge success to this tank, and things have changed a little bit over time, but still a critical part, is calcium reactors. I ran a calcium reactor on this tank probably 6 to 12 months in, so I've had one on there for about 5 years now. And instantly I saw a dramatic shift in growth and coloration of my corals. Self-admittedly, I was not dosing trace elements before. I was only dosing your alkalinity, calcium, and magnesium. So the calcium reactor obviously added trace because it's melting down coral bone and skeleton, which has got a lot more than those 3 major elements. It's got a lot of trace elements as well. But that being said, even with trace elements now, I find calcium reactors really great. They're fairly well set and forget, particularly if you get the right equipment to run them. They're just always balanced, which is a problem I had with dosing beforehand. I was trying to dose the major 3. I'd get alkalinity and magnesium right, but calcium would be low or high. And then I'd get calcium right and magnesium would drop. And then I'd get alkalinity spikes. I just could never get all 3 perfectly balanced. Now, that's probably just me being stupid, so be it. But I never had that issue with the calcium reactor. Once I put that on, things just took off. The coral growth was off the charts. Coloration came really good. And like I said, I put that down to the stability, but also the trace elements, which obviously you got other avenues for trace elements these days. The other item on this tank that I put down to its success is the liter meter auto water change system. Now, I say liter meter because that's the brand I use. It doesn't have to be a liter meter. It can be a DIY setup, or it can be a Stena pump, or a auto aqua water change. Either way, automatic water changes have absolutely saved this tank, and they've actually given me the ability to add more tanks on. The number of times I think, how on earth would I have kept this tank going if I had to do manual water changes? And it just wouldn't happen. This tank's been running for 6 years now, and the life events that have happened over that time frame just would have seen the end of this tank. I had major back surgery where I had a tumor removed from my pelvis. I could barely walk for a couple of months, let alone think about doing water changes, or even think about lugging buckets of water was just not going to happen. And I see too often when people's tanks start to decline, they get even less motivation to work on them, and then it just becomes a spiral downwards because your tank looks crap, so you don't want to work on it, which makes your tank look even crapper, which makes you want to work on it even less, and you basically spiral down to the point where you shut the tank down. Thankfully, with the automatic water change system, I could either just let it do its thing. It was going to give me water changes all day, every day, or I could even turn it up. If I knew I was going to be neglecting doing GFO changes or whatever else it was, even if it's supplement dosing, I could turn my water changes up, and instead of doing, say, 20 litres of water change a day, I could turn it up to 50 litres of water change a day. And I'd know that that old saying goes, dilution is the best solution. I couldn't agree more. By getting more water in, new water in, old water out, you're going to fix most problems. The other benefit of the automatic water change is that it does it continuously. We strive so much for stability in our tanks, yet people love doing big water changes on them, which, sure, sometimes a big water change is great, but a big water change is about the biggest disruptor you can do. As far as stability, you're changing all of your parameters, unless your parameters are exactly the same, at which point you have to question whether you're doing a water change at all. Most people are doing water changes to remove organics and to get rid of nitrates, phosphates. Some people will do it to add a little bit more alkalinity, calcium. It depends on the growth of your tank. And if you're doing a big water change, say you're doing more than 20%, you've got to get a decent swing in there, and that's just going to disrupt the stability. Whether that actually translates to problems with your tank's a whole other debate, and to be honest, people can pick and choose however they want to go about it. Personally, having that continuous water change in my tank has been an absolute blessing. The stability I've got from it, you combine that with my calcium reactor and the continuous water changes, my tank's parameters are very, very stable. They stay the same because I'm not disrupting it at all that much. It's continually getting all of the major and minor trace elements. It's continually getting water changes, continually getting that nutrient export. It just keeps things trucking along. So they're the parts to this tank that I think have really seen the success to it, and the kind of the background to the construction of it, the equipment running. I could talk about the other things I run in there. I run a sulfur reactor, for those who don't know. It's a pretty old school technique, along with halides and calcium reactors, where you have sulfur beads. They grow a bacteria which chew down just on nitrates. I've got a whole nother video on those. If you're interested on sulfur, just search sulfur nitrates. You'll find that video. The rest of the equipment in there is pretty basic. I have an ATO in there. It has a automated top-off on it. And when I say automated top-off, I have a top-off obviously for the tank, but I also have an automatic unit on the RO reservoir itself, which is a unit I made myself. It turns the RO unit on when the water's low, turns it off when it's high. So you combine that with the automatic water changes, and I don't have to top off my RO unit. I don't have to do water changes. Another little lazy thing I've done is I've plumbed my skimmer directly into the drain, and it's got a neck cleaner on it. So I don't have to empty my skimmer. I don't have to clean the neck. In fact, my skimmer only really gets serviced maybe about once a year or once every 18 months. So the tank itself is fairly hands-off. There's not a lot I really have to do other than feed the fish and clean the glass. Of course, we still test. I do have a KH Guardian on the tank as well, which tests alkalinity every hour. Is it necessary? Absolutely not. Is it something I'm curious on? Yes. I like watching the alkalinity. I'm always curious about when the tank's drawing more. Ironically, I find with this tank, I do see the alkalinity get consumed when the halides turn on, but another time when I see alkalinity get chewed up the most is about the first 2 hours after lights out, which is something that surprises me a little bit. You would think a lot of the corals being photosynthetic, that they're going to consume alkalinity when the lights are on. But perhaps that first couple of hours when the lights go off and all their feeder tentacles are out and they're pulling in food, maybe they're consuming alkalinity then when they're growing. I don't know. I don't know the science behind it. All I know is I've seen repeatedly I get more alkalinity consumption for the first hour or two after my lights have been switched off for the day, which I just find interesting. Where was I at? Yeah, that's right. So I got my skimmer hard plumbed into the drain, so I don't empty my skimmer, I don't clean the skimmer neck. Calcium reactor, I basically top off the media once a year. Sulfur reactor, I give a service once a year. My top off unit fills itself. The sump area is pretty well set and forget. I do have a keto reactor in there, which I clean out every 2 weeks now. That's a relatively new addition. And every second cleaner, I've got a GFO reactor that I replace the GFO in. I use Aquaforest GFO. They're phosphate minus. It seems to be quite a good quality GFO, which has less residue than some of the others on the market. But that's what works for me. See what works for you. That's probably enough on the equipment. As you can tell from the theme of that, I like to try and set things up to run themselves. As much as I'm a gadget freak, I don't want to be spending all my weekends cleaning equipment and topping things up and doing that. It's not the way I like to operate. I'd rather spend my time working in the actual tank itself. So let's get to inside the tank itself and talk about some of the livestock. Some of the fish I've had in here have been with me from the start. My pair of clowns were one of the first fish that went into the tank about 2 months after cycling. This guy here, he's probably one of my favorites. I call him Colin. He's my fox face. He's been in the tank from the start as well. He's gone through a bit of a shock at the moment. He used to be the boss of this tank, but about 10 months ago, I added in my blue throat trigger pair. And I say pair, I've got 2 males of blue throat triggers. The smaller one did go in as a female, but she changed into a male. They're Jack and Jill, so now we call them Jack and Gill. But yeah, this big guy here, he's a bit flighty, as triggers tend to be, but he's become the boss of the tank, which has put my fox face's nose out of joint a little bit. He used to be really fat. He used to literally be that fat. He got a bit skinny there, and for a while you could see the, I don't know if you call it spine, but the bone that goes down through the middle of the fish from their head to their tail, you could actually start to see that. So he wasn't getting a lot of food. The last couple of months, he's just come past the camera now. I've been trying to hand feed him specifically because he's a member of our family. We've had him in the tank now for 5.5 years plus, and every one of my family knows Colin and is always curious on how Colin's going. So I just want to give the best welfare for Colin. So he's still looking a little bit skinny, but we're fattening him up. He's not stressed at all. He's such a funny fish in that he being one of the first fish in the tank, he was desperate for a buddy. And every fish we added to the tank after him, he would basically pair up with them and follow them around and do whatever they were doing. So when I added a Tang in and they started grazing the rocks, Colin would follow the Tang around and graze the rocks. When the clown pair were added in, which they did go in fairly much at the same time, and the clowns would go down, I think they were hosting in the bubble coral down here, Colin would go down there and swim with them. He's a real strange fish in that he's trying to find a friend. So we got a bit of a soft spot for Colin. I did actually buy him off a fellow reefer. He'd been in their tank for 4 years. He's been with me for coming up to 6 years, and he was fully grown when we got him. So how old he is, I don't know, but he's got to be at least 10, possibly a lot more. And to be honest, I don't know how long foxface live for. I'm under the impression it may be around 30 years. So hopefully we'll Colin for a lot longer to come. My other fish that I'd like to point out is my clownfish pair. We've got Helen and Troy, and yeah, I do name all my fish. All the fish that are unique anyway, I name. Helen and Troy are a Picasso pair of clowns. At the time of adding them, which was 5.5 to nearly 6 years ago, they were about the most exotic clowns you could get in Australia. I know we're spoilt for choice now, but some A-grade Picassos were about as special as it got. We called them Helen and Troy because my female's got a gladiator mark on one side, and at about that time the Eric Bana movie Troy came out, and because she had a bit of a gladiator mark, we just kind of went with a Helen and Troy theme. They've been with us obviously a long time. They're funny fish. They go through phases where they breed and they're best buddies, and then they obviously have a little bit of a lover's rift, and one will host in one coral and one will host in another coral on the opposite end of the tank, and they'll be like that for a couple of months before they pair up again. So strange fish. I can't explain it. Maybe they've been married a long time, I don't know, but you can see they're pairing up in that bubble coral again now, which is nice to see. What other fish have I got that I'd like to point out? I've got my purple Tang in there. We got a name for him. He's Prince. Obviously, purple was very iconic colour to Prince. To be honest, I'm not even that much of a Prince fan. I like the music he made, but I'm not a diehard or anything. It just seemed to be a good fitting name. He's a pretty cool fish. I know people say that purple tanks can get fairly dominant in the tank. He's not done that at all. He's pretty easy going. One fish that has been fairly dominant in the tank is Harley. He's hiding up the back there now, but he's our yellow candy hog, hence hog Harley. He's an absolute bully. He will not allow me to add wrasse to this tank because they're a similar shape to him. He's eaten, there he goes. He's eaten all the shrimp. He constantly knocks off snails. He's a bit of a pest. He's a cool fish, don't get me wrong, but geez, he's got a lot of cons to go with his pros. So if you're thinking about adding a hogfish to your tank, just be careful. One other fish that I will point out is hiding over there is Prius, and that's he's probably my favourite fish. People always ask what my favourite fish is, and I've got a soft spot for Colin. but I don't know, I guess maybe being a bit snobby. Prius, my hybrid angel, hence Prius, being the hybrid that they are. He is a hybrid lemon peel and what are they called? Ebly angels, so they call them a tiger pike. He's a pretty cool fish. He gets away with absolute murder. Being an angel, he just swims around the tank just chowing down on coral polyps all day long. My SPS gets minimal polyp extension because Prius likes to go around just munching on them. Thankfully, he hasn't really destroyed many corals. I did have a Trachophilia in here, which he finished within a couple of months of adding him to the tank. But other than that, he just upsets them. He doesn't really kill them. I haven't added a Trachophilia since. I am just testing the waters with some other soft corals. I've got some Deshies in there, which he mostly leaves alone. The pink speckled one he does peck at a bit, but thankfully my blue and red one that's recovering from a fair sting, he leaves alone. So that's some fair stress off me, I guess. What other fish we got? We got coal, a really uniquely named coal tang. Such an underrated fish. The patterns on those guys are just incredible. You've got like a line dot stripe on him, the beautiful contrasting yellow and orange eye on such a deep purple body. I've got a school of chromis. Another set of fish that I get asked a lot about is my glass cardinals, which always school in really tightly. Typically sold as a feeder fish for predators. They're really cheap. I pick them up for like $3-4 a fish. And they always school really tightly. They stay so close together. I've had them for a long time. I tried to add to the school. I added another dozen small ones, and unfortunately that just set off a feeding frenzy for my triggers. So if I'm going to add any more glass cardinals, I'll need to add larger ones because they just thought I was adding food to the tank. What other fish can I talk about? So yeah, we got Jack. I've got Cleo, my pyramid butterfly. I've had a few people ask if they're reef safe. I can't speak for the whole species. I can only speak for Cleo. Obviously Cleopatra, pyramid angel, pyramid butterfly, sorry. You get the synonym there. Cleo's been an absolute model citizen. I never, ever see Cleo even look at a coral, let alone touch one before even thinking about killing one. I have heard other people have had trouble with them. It surprises me just for the fact that I've never even seen her look at a coral, but you know, every fish has their own personality. Personally, I would roll the dice and add one. In fact, the only thing that I am disappointed I didn't do when I added Cleopatra to this tank was add more of them because they are actually a nice schooling fish and they've got beautiful striking colours. I wouldn't want to add any more now just because I feel like if I added more now, there's a chance they could fight. And Cleo's earned her space in this tank. She went through a little bit of bullying when she went in and has come out the other side looking happy and healthy. I don't want to rock the boat with her now. So yeah, that's one of my regrets is I would have liked to have added more pyramid butterflies. What other fish have we got in here? I've got Bill, my Banggai Cardinal, poor old Bill. I've had him for probably 5 years, 2 months, I'd say. I had a pair. You can sex Banggai Cardinals, added a pair. They bred continuously. And the female only passed maybe about 4 months ago. And from what I've read up, that's probably, she passed just through a lifespan. Banggai Cardinals probably got a max life expectancy around 7 or 8 years, and she was an adult size when I got her, and I had her for 5 years, so she was probably just starting to get to the later stages in life. Well, that's what I told myself. Hopefully that's what it was. There was no real aggression in the tank, so I don't think she would have died from any other means. What other fish have we got in here? This is the problem, you get too many fish and you forget about them. That's probably all the ones I'd like to cover. We've got all the tangs. Oh no, one more pair of fish. I've got a beautiful pair of flame hawks. They're pretty, the reason why I nearly forgot about them is they lay pretty low except for feeding time. For my Australian viewers, you'll notice the name is Buddy and Jacinta. I called them that because they're hawks, they're hawkfish, but they're red. Buddy Franklin used to play for the Hawks, but now he plays for the Swans, which is a red and white team. His girlfriend's Jacinta. She's a fair, I don't know, she's a famous wag. She did have other reality TV background, I guess, or a model. I'm not sure. Oh yeah, that's right. Jacinta was the one who said, "Where the bloody hell are you?" in an Australia campaign. I'll try and get the footage for you. So they're my flame hawks. I can't see them about at the moment because, yeah, they lay pretty low until feeding time. Sometimes you can see them. They kind of dart in and out of the coral. They're cool fish. They don't swim around so much. They're normally being pretty quiet, but when you see them, they just got such attitude. They can also be bullies to snails and shrimp, but Harley, my hogfish, absolutely smashes them, so don't have to worry about that. So I think that's fish-wise, that's pretty much all the things I'd like to cover. I guess we can move on to the corals now. I kind of went through the same path that seemingly almost everyone goes through in this hobby. When I started off, I didn't care for SBS at all. I couldn't think of anything worse than SBS. I wanted that beautiful flowing coral, hammers, torches, bubble corals, even Duncans. I'm like, that's where it's at. Just give me LPS and softies. LPS and softies are cool. You can put them in your tank and it kind of creates the reef. But once you get SBS growing in your tank, there's just some strange addiction about it. Hammer corals, yeah, LPS and everything all grow, that's fine. They take a long time and it's not quite so obvious. SBS grows fairly quickly and the shape they form, how you can actually see them growing before your eyes. I love the diversity that it allows my small fish to swim through, like my big Dallas coral in the middle here. We might as well talk about that. That's probably the tank's showpiece. That started life as a frag about, I don't know, maybe 1.5 inches long for American viewers, about 4 centimeters for our Australian viewers. Yeah, probably about the size of my pinky finger. I got that as a frag from a bloke in Geelong called John. He gave that to me, put it in my tank. Full disclosure, it did nothing for about 6 months and then it started to grow. That was about the time I added halides and calcium reactor though. And boy, did it grow. It really started to take off. This piece here now goes from one end of the tank to the other. So it's 2.5 foot wide. It's probably only about 2 foot wide that way and probably 1.5 foot deep. It does breach the surface in a number of areas, which is cool, but also annoying because it grows algae where it breaches the surface. I've been saying I cut 400 frags off this Dallas for probably a year now, so it's probably closer to about 600 frags. Continually trimming it. In fact, you can see a couple of pieces down here on the sand, and that's because when my magnet cleaner goes past, it just knocks branches off. It's probably my favorite coral. A lot of the hardcore reefers out there tell me to get rid of the Dallas coral, and I'm looking at you, Biggles, because it is such a common and easy to keep SBS, but I wouldn't change it for the world. It's the showpiece in my tank, and I love it. Whilst it might not be as intricate as some of my other pieces, it makes the tank what it is. And after you've had a couple of bits of SBS really grow out and you really get that fully grown in colony feel, it's hard to go back. So that's my big green Dallas, which is, yeah, in Australia we call it Dallas. I guess it's a green stag in other parts of the world. Some of my other favorite corals, I've got this beautiful blue and green. I'm not sure if it's a Lacani or some other species, but it's absolutely one of my favorites. I've got this lovely, I don't know if it's got a name, but it's like a boysenberry type SBS. It's got purple tips and green through it. It's really started to take off. I love my Panape down here, although it's got a bit of algae growing through it at the moment. Right above that's a beautiful pink bird's nest, which is growing quite quickly. I'm an absolute sucker for strawberry shortcake. I find in my tank, and it took me quite a few goes to work this out, whenever I bought a strawberry shortcake, almost regardless of the intensity of the color, when I'd add it to my tank, give it a week, it'd turn brown, and it'd stay brown. And I mean, it'd stay brown for months. And the number of times I gave up on them and took them out, until one time I probably just forgot about it. And I noticed about 6 months later, it was coming back in color, and it came back with a vengeance. So that strawberry shortcake up there now, he's been in the tank for maybe 3 years now, and the color on that's crazy. I'll get a picture on screen for you. Some other pieces I've got, I love the candy cane here. This one just photographs beautifully. The Duncan's always cool, although it's kind of shrouding itself now. I'm not a huge Zoa guy, but I've got a few sort of collector Zoas there. I've got some beautiful Deshies. I'll move the camera, or the seat so you can see. My poor Deshies do cop a little bit of flack from my Angel. Does nip at it, but it does leave my other sort of showpiece one alone, which is cool. I love this Scully. I bought it as a really small Scully, but it's just continued to grow out. It's got some really cool coloration in it, and I just love the way that it's kind of melting onto the sand. I've got a bit of a hammer garden up here, which I must admit the hammers are the things I loved the most at the start. They kind of lost a little bit of gloss for me now, but I've got a couple of nice pieces in there. Other than that, I'm actually enjoy some slightly different corals. I love Samacora. I love this purple thing going on up there. I don't know if it's a pokey or a, I don't know what else it is, but it's pretty cool. I quite love, excuse me, some pink Millipora I've got. There's like a real metallic pink. A couple of chalice that I've got I really like too. What else have I got around there? Some different Monties. So I've got a good variety of coral in there, and it kind of just, I guess now I keep a bit of an eye out for things that may not necessarily be the brightest color or the rarest corals, but just things that you don't see at the store every week. So when something comes in that people don't know what species it is, that's the kind of coral I want to grab, just because it keeps it interesting for me now. What else can we cover with this tank? I guess we could talk about some things that I do or don't do. One thing I guess is a little controversial with them. I'll move the chair forward again. A little controversial with what I do with this tank is I don't quarantine fish. Never have. I guess you could say I'm running the gauntlet there. I buy my fish, 95% of my fish have come from one store. That store does quarantining. Deer Park Aquarium have quality fish. They won't sell something that's not that hasn't been treated or isn't healthy or isn't eating. They know me. They know my system. They know what fish I've got. They know what fish are going to cause trouble. They know. One of the parts of planning this tank was to go through the plan for the fish list. Whilst over time it has deviated a little. For example, that Angel was never on the plan. That came up for sale in Adelaide, which is an 8-hour drive each way. I went and got that fish and came back in one day. So it's like a 16-hour drive for a fish, hence why it's technically my favourite fish. That one was never on the plan, but most of the others were, and we went through the plan of what fish I wanted, what order we'd have to add them in. Dave makes sure that I only have high quality fish. Doesn't mean I've never lost a fish. I absolutely have. I've lost my absolute favourite fish, and I've tried twice, and I've killed them both. Exactly the same way is a blonde lipstick tang, otherwise known as Narso tangs. I had each one for a year and a half. They became big, they became fat. They were both males. They had long streamers. I had them individually. Not getting bullied, not bullying anyone else, and then just overnight died. When that happened the second time around, I just said to myself, I can't do that again. One, because they actually are my favourite fish. Family love them, I love them. They look so happy and healthy, and then they just up and die. It's an emotional roller coaster, so we just can't do that again. Plus, whatever it is that's upsetting those fish, or maybe it's what I'm feeding, or something missing from their diet, or some sort of disease. I don't know what it is, so I can only assume it's going to happen again, and I can't deliberately add a fish knowing that it's most likely going to die. So I'm going to have to steer clear of the Narso tangs. I did have a beautiful feminist wrasse and also a red striped candy hog. Two beautiful fish that I would get again in a heartbeat, but I cannot add them while I've got that hogfish in there. He bullied both of them. He didn't kill them, but he wouldn't let them eat. So they just slowly starved away and died. And they're quite difficult fish to deliberately get food into. So if I was to do things again, I probably wouldn't have the hogfish. As cool of a fish as he is, he does limit my choices with some other things. I would love to try blonde Narso again. I can't do it with this system though, because whatever it is, it's just not working for me. Perhaps when we get some new food down the line, we might be able to work that out. Another pair of fish I had in here that didn't work out for me in the end. Thankfully, I was able to remove them before anything worse happened. That was a pair of Moorish idols. Absolutely beautiful fish, eating quite well. one started to bully the other, and then one or both started to eat coral. So I always had one skinny and stressed, and I always had coral suffering, so they both had to go. They went to fish-only systems, and I believe they're still alive to this day. I know they were a year ago, and that meant they'd been in their new home for at least 3 years, which, as far as I'm concerned, means that they've transferred well. I'm talking about what I would do differently, and that's probably because this tank is starting to near the end of its life. And when I say that, it's the tank itself, I mean, it's pretty full. I can't really add more fish. I could add maybe some small, I could add some more chromis or something, but I can't really add any more big fish without upsetting the apple cart too much. The coral, there's always room for more coral. I'm starting to stick coral onto dead coral or even live coral and getting them to just branch off each other. You can see I've got a whole heap of stuff just scattered along the sand bed here, which personally I don't like the look of. I'd rather have the sand bed fairly clear with the odd couple of pieces of coral on there. So this tank is really, it's filling up. Plus it is also entering its 6th year of operation, and silicon doesn't last forever. This tank has had a couple of issues. I've had power go off and siphon break not work. Flood the floor in front of it. I've got a little bit of swelling in some of the cabinet. It's a wood cabinet, cabinet and stand, which means it's not going to be perfectly square. So we've got basically 1,000 kilos of rock and water in here on something that's not perfectly square, on silicon that's entering its 6th year of age. You start rocking the cart a little bit there. You're rolling the dice, and it's not something I want to do. Plus, we want to change the flooring in this room. My wife's desperate to do that, and we can't do it with the tank here. So I said, if I upgraded the tank, we could take this one down. I could put them into temporary setups. We could replace the floor, and then I could put a new tank in. So that's got the approval from my wife. I just got to save up the funds now, because if I'm upgrading this tank, I'm not going to be able to go huge. I've only got a little bit of extra room here. I'll probably go to something like an 8x3 by 2.5. I'll go to a extruded aluminium stand. I'll keep the same lighting. I love the Kessel A360X and the Radium Halides. I'll switch out to something like an Abyss return pump, just because I've got a couple of those and they're just bulletproof. Probably go even bigger again on the calcium reactor. I'd absolutely keep sulfur reactor. A lot of the equipment that I've already got would transfer in, but there's just a fair amount of expense in the extruded aluminium stands. Are quite expensive once you start talking that size of tank. Sumps. Also got some great connections with the guys out at Halides that make incredible acrylic sumps. It still costs money, right? Yeah, by the time we pay for the new floors in the house, I want to keep some money for the tank, and yeah, the money bank's just going to have to be a little bit fatter by the time we get to that. But I'm hoping the next year or so, we'll start putting steps in place to decommission this tank and bring in a new tank, which will be exciting times. So I hope I've covered enough of this tank and some of the things that I do and don't do. If you have any questions at all, feel free to pop it in the comment section down below. If I get a heap of questions for things that I have missed, I'll do another video. I know this video has gone for a fair while already, but I honestly could talk about my tank all day, every day, and people that have come over to my house to see it in person will know that I can chat about tanks all day long. So feel free to ask any questions down below. And of course, if you're in the area, I'm in Geelong in Australia, which is about an hour out of Melbourne, and you want to see the tank in person, feel free to hit me up. I love having people over to check out the tank. So people are always welcome. Come in and check it out. We'll have a beer and some pizza and talk marine tanks, because I just love this hobby. I like keeping involved with the hobby, trying to get more people into the hobby, helping beginners get through those early steps, because like I pointed out, even at the point of setting up this tank, I really didn't have any idea what I was doing, and a lot of people helped me through. I still, despite being in the hobby now for 7 years, which sadly makes me a veteran in the hobby, and that's the whole mindset that upsets me, is that I still feel like I know maybe about 4% of the hobby. And if I'm considered a veteran, that means a lot of people out there know less than 4%, which is terrifying. So we've got to help upskill everyone in the hobby and get behind each other and try to minimize coral and fish losses and make this hobby as approachable, easy, affordable as possible. So I better stop ranting, because like I said, I could go on all day. If you've enjoyed the video, I really appreciate the likes. And of course, if you want to see more videos like this, be sure to subscribe, hit that bell notification so you don't miss any videos in future. I think that's about it. Until next time, guys, thanks for watching. Catch you later.